Marcus Richardson had always been a man of routine. Every morning at 7 sharp, he would kiss his wife Sarah goodbye, grab his coffee, and head to his downtown law office. He would return home by 6:30, have dinner with his family, help his 2 children with homework, and settle into his evening routine. This had been his life for the past 8 years, ever since his youngest daughter Emma was born. The Richardson family lived in a beautiful suburban home with a white picket fence, perfectly manicured lawn, and a 2-car garage. Marcus worked hard to provide this comfortable life for his family. Sarah managed their household and worked part-time as a freelance graphic designer. Their children, 10-year-old Jake and 8-year-old Emma, were typical kids who loved video games, soccer, and causing the occasional bit of mischief. 2 years ago, when Sarah's workload increased and Marcus started taking on more demanding cases, they decided to hire help. That's when Maria Gonzalez entered their lives. Maria was a 45-year-old woman from Guatemala who had moved to the United States 15 years earlier. She spoke broken English but had a warm smile and came with excellent references from 3 other families in their neighborhood. Maria worked for the Richardsons 5 days a week, arriving at 8 in the morning and leaving at 4 in the afternoon. She cleaned the house, did laundry, prepared meals, and most importantly, watched Jake and Emma after school until Marcus or Sarah came home. The children seemed to like her well enough, though they rarely talked about her at dinner. When Marcus asked about their day, they would mention friends, teachers, and school activities, but Maria was rarely part of their stories. Marcus appreciated Maria's work ethic. The house was always spotless when he came home. Dinner was often prepared or at least started, and the children were safe and fed. Maria was quiet and respectful, always greeting him with a polite nod when he arrived home. She would quickly gather her things and leave, speaking only when necessary and always in her limited English. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Marcus followed his usual routine. He had a big case coming up, a corporate merger that required extensive preparation. His briefcase was packed with documents, and his mind was already focused on the depositions he would be conducting that day. Sarah was in the kitchen making breakfast while Jake and Emma argued over who got the last piece of toast. "Don't forget, I have that client meeting tonight," Sarah reminded him as she handed him his travel mug filled with coffee. "I might be home late." Marcus nodded absently, scrolling through emails on his phone. "Maria will be here until 4, right?" "Yes, and I should be home by 5 at the latest," Sarah replied, then kissed him goodbye. The day at the office started like any other. Marcus reviewed case files, met with clients, and prepared for upcoming court appearances. His assistant brought him coffee and reminded him of his appointments. Everything was proceeding normally until around 2 in the afternoon, when he received a phone call that would change everything. "Mr. Richardson, this is Janet from Brookfield Elementary," the voice on the other end said. "I'm calling to let you know that Jake won't need to stay after school today for soccer practice. Coach Williams called in sick, so practice has been canceled." Marcus thanked her and hung up, then immediately called home to let Maria know that Jake would be coming home earlier than usual. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. He tried again, thinking perhaps Maria was in another room or outside hanging laundry. Again, no answer. A small worry began to form in his mind. What if something had happened? What if Maria was sick or hurt? He tried calling Sarah, but her phone went straight to voicemail as well. She was probably in her client meeting. Marcus looked at his watch. It was 2:30. Jake would be home in about 30 minutes, and Emma's school ended at 3:15. If Maria wasn't answering the phone, who would be there when the children arrived? He made a quick decision. The depositions could wait until tomorrow morning, and his other appointments weren't critical. He packed up his briefcase, told his assistant he was leaving early, and headed home. The drive usually took 25 minutes, but Marcus found himself pressing a little harder on the gas pedal than usual. As he drove through their neighborhood, everything looked peaceful and normal. Mrs. Peterson was working in her garden. The mailman was making his rounds, and children were playing in their yards. When he turned onto his street, he could see his house at the end of the block. Maria's old blue Honda was still in the driveway, which was both a relief and a source of confusion. If she was home, why hadn't she answered the phone? Marcus pulled into his garage and entered through the kitchen door. The house was quiet, but he could hear voices coming from somewhere inside. He set down his briefcase and listened more carefully. The voices seemed to be coming from the living room, and he could distinctly hear Maria speaking. But something was different about her voice. It sounded more confident, more fluent than the broken English he was used to hearing. Curious and slightly concerned, Marcus walked quietly toward the living room. As he got closer, he could hear Emma's voice as well, speaking in what sounded like perfect Spanish. His daughter was speaking Spanish? Since when did Emma know Spanish? Marcus paused at the corner of the hallway, just out of sight of the living room. What he heard next stopped him in his tracks. Maria was speaking in rapid, fluent Spanish, and both Jake and Emma were responding in kind. Not only were they speaking Spanish, but they were speaking it well, with proper pronunciation and complex sentence structures that would be impressive for adult language learners, let alone children. He crept closer, staying hidden behind the wall, and peered around the corner into the living room. What he saw there was completely unexpected. Maria was standing at an easel with a map of Central America pinned to it. Jake and Emma were sitting on the floor with notebooks in their laps, writing intently. There were books scattered around them, but these weren't typical children's books. They appeared to be textbooks about history, geography, and culture. Maria was pointing to different countries on the map and speaking about them in Spanish. She was describing the mountains of Guatemala, the rainforests of Costa Rica, and the ancient civilizations that had lived in these regions thousands of years ago. Her English, which had always seemed so limited when she spoke to Marcus and Sarah, was nowhere to be heard. Instead, she spoke with the confidence and knowledge of an educated teacher. Emma raised her hand and asked a question in Spanish about Mayan architecture. Jake added his own question about the political history of Central America. These were not the simple questions of children learning basic vocabulary. These were sophisticated inquiries that demonstrated a deep understanding of complex subjects. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, his mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? How had his children learned to speak Spanish so fluently without him knowing? And who exactly was Maria Gonzalez? Marcus remained frozen in the hallway, watching and listening as Maria continued what was clearly a structured lesson. She moved from the map to a collection of artifacts that Marcus had never seen before. There were small clay figurines, colorful textiles, and what appeared to be replicas of ancient coins and jewelry. Where had all of these items come from? And how long had they been in his house without his knowledge? Now, who can tell me about the significance of jade in Mayan culture? Maria asked in Spanish, her voice carrying the authority and confidence of an experienced educator. Emma's hand shot up immediately. The Mayans believed jade was more valuable than gold, she replied in fluent Spanish. They thought it had magical properties and could connect the living world with the spirit world. Kings and priests wore jade jewelry to show their power and connection to the gods. Marcus blinked in amazement. His 8-year-old daughter was discussing ancient Mayan religious beliefs in a second language, with the sophistication of a graduate student. When had this transformation happened? How had he missed it completely? Jake jumped in with his own contribution. The jade was also used in burial ceremonies, he said, his Spanish equally impressive. They would place jade masks over the faces of important people when they died, believing it would help them in the afterlife. Maria smiled proudly and nodded. Excellent, both of you. Now let's talk about the mathematical achievements of these civilizations. Jake, can you explain the Mayan number system? Marcus watched as his son stood up and walked to a whiteboard that had been set up in the corner of the room. When had they gotten a whiteboard? Jake began drawing symbols that Marcus didn't recognize, explaining in Spanish how the Mayans used a base 20 number system instead of the base 10 system used in modern mathematics. The Mayans were incredibly advanced mathematicians, Jake explained, his voice filled with enthusiasm. They invented the concept of zero independently from other civilizations. They could calculate dates thousands of years into the future and predict eclipses with amazing accuracy. Maria beamed with pride as she listened to Jake's explanation. Very good. And Emma, can you tell us about their agricultural innovations? Emma stood up and pointed to a diagram that Marcus now noticed was hanging on the wall behind the couch. It showed a sophisticated irrigation system with raised fields surrounded by canals. The Mayans created raised field systems called chinampas, Emma began, her Spanish flowing naturally. They built these artificial islands in swampy areas and used the surrounding water to irrigate their crops. This allowed them to grow food even during dry seasons and supported large populations in areas that seemed impossible to farm. Marcus felt his legs growing weak. He leaned against the wall for support, trying to process what he was witnessing. These weren't his children. Well, they were his children, but they weren't the children he thought he knew. The Jake and Emma he knew struggled with basic math homework and complained about reading assignments. Yet here they were, discussing complex historical and mathematical concepts in a foreign language with enthusiasm and deep understanding. As he continued to watch, Maria pulled out a guitar that Marcus had never seen before. She began strumming a gentle melody and started singing in Spanish. To his continued amazement, Jake and Emma joined in, singing harmony parts as if they had been practicing for months. The song was beautiful and melancholic, clearly a traditional folk song from Latin America. When the song ended, Maria set down the guitar and looked at both children with genuine affection. "You two have learned so much this year," she said in Spanish. "Your understanding of our culture and history makes me very proud. But remember, this knowledge comes with responsibility." "What kind of responsibility?" Emma asked, settling back down on the floor. "When you understand the history of a people, you become connected to their struggles and their triumphs," Maria explained. "The civilizations we study were incredibly advanced, but they also faced great challenges. Many of their descendants, people like me, have had to leave their homelands to find opportunities elsewhere." Jake nodded seriously. "Like how you had to leave Guatemala to come here." Marcus felt another shock. Maria was from Guatemala? He had assumed this based on her previous employment references, but she had never actually told him where she was from. How did Jake know this? "Yes," Maria continued, "but leaving doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean being ashamed of where you come from or pretending to be less than you are. I want you both to understand that every person has a story, a history and value that goes much deeper than what appears on the surface." Emma raised her hand again. "Is that why you pretend not to speak English very well when our parents are around?" Marcus felt his heart stop. Maria pretended not to speak English well? Why would she do that? Maria sighed and sat down on the couch, gesturing for both children to come closer. "It's complicated, Emma. Sometimes adults make assumptions about people based on how they look or where they come from. When I first started working for families like yours, I learned that many people were more comfortable if I seemed simple and didn't threaten their sense of superiority. But that's not fair," Jake protested. "You're smarter than most of our teachers." "Fairness is not always the reality of the world, Jake," Maria replied gently. "I have a master's degree in education from the University of Guatemala. I was a teacher there for 15 years before I came to this country. But when I arrived, my credentials weren't recognized. My accent made people doubt my intelligence. My appearance made them assume I was only capable of cleaning and cooking." Marcus felt a wave of shame wash over him. He realized that he had made exactly those assumptions. He had never asked Maria about her background, her education, or her qualifications beyond her ability to clean house and watch children. He had seen her broken English and assumed it reflected her intelligence rather than simply being the challenge of learning a second language as an adult. "So you decided to teach us instead," Emma said, understanding dawning in her voice. "When I saw how curious and intelligent you both were, I couldn't help myself," Maria admitted with a smile. "At first, I just answered your questions about the Spanish words you heard on television or at school. But then you wanted to learn more, and I realized I could give you something special. I could share the richness of my culture and help you understand that the world is much bigger and more complex than what you see in your neighborhood." Jake looked thoughtful. "Should we tell our parents what we've been learning?" Maria hesitated, and Marcus could see conflict in her expression. "That decision is up to you. I hope that someday your parents will see me as more than just someone who cleans their house. But I also understand that change takes time." "I think they would be proud of us for learning so much," Emma said optimistically. "Maybe," Maria replied carefully, "but adults sometimes have complicated feelings about their children learning things they don't understand themselves. Some parents feel threatened when their children know things they don't know." Marcus felt another pang of shame. Was he the type of parent who would feel threatened by his children's knowledge? He wanted to believe he would be proud, but Maria's words made him examine his own attitudes and assumptions. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted his thoughts. Through the window, he could see the school bus dropping off Emma, but Emma was already here, in the living room with Maria and Jake. Marcus looked more carefully and realized the child getting off the bus was their neighbor's daughter, who looked similar to Emma from a distance. "We still have a few minutes before Emma gets home from school," Maria said, checking her watch. Marcus was confused until he realized that the Emma in the living room must have come home early as well, perhaps for the same reason Jake had. "Let's quickly review your Spanish vocabulary for this week," Maria continued. She pulled out flashcards and began drilling both children on words related to family, emotions, and daily activities. Their responses were quick and confident, showing a vocabulary that was far more advanced than basic conversational Spanish. As Marcus continued to watch this secret world that had been unfolding in his own home, he realized that everything he thought he knew about his children and his housekeeper had been completely wrong. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Marcus remained hidden in the hallway, his mind reeling from everything he had witnessed. The sound of the front door opening made everyone in the living room freeze. It was Emma, arriving home from school at her usual time. The Emma who had been in the living room quickly gathered some books and materials, and Marcus realized this must be Jake, who had been participating in the lesson after coming home early from his canceled soccer practice. "Hola, Maria," the real Emma called out as she dropped her backpack by the door. "Hola, Emma. ¿Cómo estuvo tu día en la escuela?" Maria responded, asking how her day at school was. "Fue muy bueno. Mrs. Patterson nos enseñó sobre volcanes hoy," Emma replied, saying her day was good and that Mrs. Patterson had taught them about volcanoes. Marcus was stunned again. Emma had been in school all day, yet she was speaking Spanish just as fluently as he had witnessed Jake doing during the lesson. This meant that both children had been learning Spanish with Maria for quite some time, and they had somehow kept it completely secret from him and Sarah. Emma entered the living room and immediately noticed the educational materials spread around. Without missing a beat, she began helping to put them away in what was clearly a well-practiced routine. Jake joined in, and within minutes all evidence of the lesson had disappeared. The whiteboard was erased and turned around to face the wall. The maps were rolled up and stored behind the couch. The artifacts were carefully placed in a box that was then hidden in the closet. The guitar disappeared into a case that fit perfectly under the coffee table. Marcus watched in amazement as his living room was transformed back into its normal appearance. If he hadn't witnessed the lesson himself, he would never have known that anything educational had taken place there. The children and Maria worked together like a well-oiled machine, clearly having done this transformation many times before. "Did you finish your math homework from yesterday?" Maria asked Jake in English, her accent thick and her grammar simplified. The same broken English that Marcus was used to hearing. "Yes, it's in my backpack," Jake replied in English, though Marcus could hear the slight disappointment in his voice at having to switch back to their usual communication style. "And Emma, do you have spelling words to practice today?" Maria continued in her limited English. "Yeah, but they're really easy," Emma responded, also switching back to English but with a similar note of disappointment. Marcus realized that his children were essentially living double lives. With Maria, they engaged in sophisticated academic discussions and cultural learning in Spanish. With their parents, they reverted to being typical elementary school children, struggling with basic homework assignments. The contrast was jarring and made Marcus question everything he thought he knew about his children's capabilities and interests. As he continued to observe, Marcus noticed other details that he had previously missed. The bookshelves in the living room, which he had always assumed contained only the family's usual collection of novels and coffee table books, actually held numerous Spanish-language books mixed in among the English ones. When had those appeared? How had he never noticed them before? He also observed the way Maria interacted with his children when she thought no adults were watching. Instead of the somewhat distant professional demeanor she maintained around Marcus and Sarah, she was warm, affectionate, and genuinely engaged with Jake and Emma's development. She asked them about their friends, their feelings, and their dreams in a way that reminded Marcus of his own grandmother. "Maria," Emma said as she settled down at the kitchen table with her official homework, "can you help me with my math?" "Of course, mija," Maria replied, and Marcus caught the Spanish term of endearment, "my daughter," that she used for Emma. No wonder his children seemed to have such a positive relationship with Maria. She clearly cared for them deeply. As Maria helped Emma with her homework, Marcus noticed that she was able to explain mathematical concepts in ways that made them easier to understand. She used visual aids and real-world examples that connected abstract numbers to concrete situations. Emma, who usually struggled with math at the dinner table when Marcus tried to help her, was grasping concepts quickly and even seemed to be enjoying the work. Meanwhile, Jake had settled into a chair in the corner with what appeared to be a regular children's book. But as Marcus looked more closely, he realized that while the cover was in English, Jake was actually reading a Spanish translation that had been carefully placed inside the English book's cover. Even during their normal after-school time, the children were continuing their Spanish education in secret. The more Marcus observed, the more he realized how much planning and thought had gone into this deception. It wasn't a malicious deception. He could see that everyone involved was genuinely happy and engaged. But it was definitely an elaborate system designed to hide the true extent of the children's learning and Maria's capabilities from him and Sarah. Marcus began to feel a complex mixture of emotions. Part of him was amazed and proud of his children's accomplishments. They had clearly been working hard and learning at a level far beyond what he had imagined they were capable of. Part of him was impressed by Maria's dedication and skill as an educator. She had obviously been providing his children with a rich, meaningful education that went far beyond basic childcare. But another part of him felt hurt and confused. Why had his children felt the need to hide this from him? Did they think he wouldn't approve? Did they think he wouldn't be interested in their achievements? And why had Maria chosen to present herself as less educated and capable than she actually was? As he continued to watch, Marcus overheard a conversation that provided some insight into these questions. "Maria," Jake said quietly, "do you think our parents would be upset if they knew about our lessons?" Maria paused in her work with Emma and considered the question carefully. "I don't think they would be upset exactly," she said slowly, "but I think they might be confused. Many parents expect their children to learn certain things at certain times and in certain ways. They might not understand why you're learning about ancient civilizations when you're supposed to be focusing on multiplication tables. But learning about the Mayans helps me understand math better," Emma protested. "When you explained how they used their number system to create calendars, it made fractions make more sense." "I know, Mia, and you're absolutely right," Maria replied. "But not all adults understand that learning is connected. Some people think that subjects should be kept separate and that children should only learn what's expected for their grade level." Jake looked thoughtful. "Do you think our parents are like that?" Maria hesitated. "Your parents love you very much and they want what's best for you. But they're also very busy with their own work and lives. Sometimes busy parents prefer simple situations that don't require them to learn new things or change their routines." Marcus felt a sharp pang of recognition. Was Maria right? Had he become so focused on his career and his routines that he had stopped being curious about his children's inner lives? Had he created an environment where his children felt they needed to hide their intellectual growth from him? "I wish we could tell them," Emma said wistfully. "I want to share what we've learned with them." "Maybe someday you will," Maria replied gently. "But for now, this is our special time together. And there's nothing wrong with having something that's just for us." "It feels like a secret, though," Jake said. "And secrets sometimes feel bad." "Not all secrets are bad, Jake," Maria explained. "Some secrets are like gifts that we're saving for the right time to share. The important thing is that we're not doing anything harmful or dishonest. We're learning and growing and becoming better people. That's never something to be ashamed of." Marcus realized that he was facing a decision. He could continue hiding in the hallway, pretending he had never witnessed this scene. He could go back to his car, drive around the block, and return home at his usual time, maintaining the status quo. Or he could step forward and reveal himself, potentially changing the dynamic of his family forever. The question was, what kind of father did he want to be? Marcus stood in the hallway for several more minutes, wrestling with his decision. The rational part of his mind told him to retreat quietly and process what he had learned before taking any action. The father in him, however, was bursting with pride and curiosity about his children's hidden accomplishments. Finally, his heart won over his head. He took a deep breath and stepped around the corner into the living room. "Hello, everyone," he said, trying to keep his voice casual and normal. The reaction was immediate and telling. Jake and Emma both froze, their eyes wide with surprise and what looked like fear. Maria quickly stood up from where she had been helping Emma with homework, her expression shifting instantly to the deferential mask that Marcus now realized was exactly that. A mask. "Mr. Richardson," Maria said in her familiar broken English. "You are home early today. Is everything okay?" Marcus looked at his children, who were staring at him with expressions of panic. Emma had unconsciously moved closer to Maria, as if seeking protection. Jake was gripping his pencil so tightly that his knuckles were white. "Everything's fine," Marcus said gently, realizing that his sudden appearance had terrified them. "Jake's soccer practice was canceled, so I decided to come home early." He paused, making eye contact with each of them. "I've been standing in the hallway for a while, listening to your conversation." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked like she might cry, and Jake's face had gone completely pale. Maria maintained her composure, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. "Am I in trouble?" Emma asked in a small voice. Marcus felt his heart break a little. The fact that his daughter's first reaction was fear rather than excitement about sharing her achievements told him everything. He needed to know about what kind of environment he had unknowingly created in his home. "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble," he said, moving slowly toward the couch and sitting down at their level. "Actually, I'm amazed by what I heard. I had no idea you could speak Spanish so well." Jake glanced at Maria, clearly looking for guidance on how to respond. Maria gave him a small nod, and Jake turned back to his father. "We've been learning for almost 2 years," Jake admitted quietly. "Maria teaches us about history and culture and language. She's really smart, Dad." "I can see that," Marcus replied, looking at Maria with new respect. "Maria, I owe you an apology. I clearly made assumptions about you that were completely wrong." Maria looked surprised and uncertain. She glanced at the children, then back at Marcus. When she spoke, her English was still accented, but noticeably more sophisticated than what she usually used around him. "Mr. Richardson, I hope you understand that I never meant any disrespect. I love your children very much, and I only wanted to help them learn." "I can see that too," Marcus said. "And please call me Marcus. I think we need to have an honest conversation about everything." Over the next hour, a remarkable transformation took place in the Richardson living room. Slowly, carefully, the truth began to emerge. Maria told Marcus about her background as an educator in Guatemala, her struggles to have her credentials recognized in the United States, and her decision to work as a housekeeper while continuing to educate children informally. "When I first came to this country," Maria explained, her English becoming more fluent as she relaxed, "I applied for teaching positions, but school districts wanted additional certifications that would take years to obtain. I needed to work immediately to support my family. Housekeeping jobs were available, and many families needed someone who could also watch their children." "But why did you let us think you didn't speak English well?" Marcus asked. Maria sighed. "Experience taught me that many employers were more comfortable with housekeepers who seemed simple and non-threatening. If I demonstrated my full education and capabilities, some families worried that I might challenge their authority or make them feel inadequate." Marcus winced, recognizing the truth in her words. "And we did exactly that, didn't we?" "You weren't unkind," Maria said diplomatically. "But you never asked about my background or interests. You saw what you expected to see." Jake and Emma had been listening to this conversation with fascination. Emma suddenly spoke up. "Dad, Maria has been teaching us so many amazing things. Did you know that ancient Mayan mathematicians could predict eclipses hundreds of years in the future? And they invented the concept of zero independently from other civilizations," Jake added excitedly, his earlier fear forgotten. "Maria showed us how their number system worked, and it actually makes some types of calculations easier than our system." Marcus looked at his children with wonder. "Show me," he said simply. What followed was one of the most remarkable afternoons of Marcus's life. Jake and Emma, no longer hiding their knowledge, began sharing everything they had learned over the past 2 years. They brought out the hidden materials and explained the artifacts that Maria had collected. They demonstrated their Spanish vocabulary and sang the folk songs they had memorized. Emma showed Marcus the map of Central America and explained the geography and climate of different regions. Jake drew out mathematical problems using Mayan numerals and walked his father through the solutions. Together, they told stories about ancient civilizations, modern political challenges, and cultural traditions that had been passed down through generations. Maria, seeing Marcus's genuine interest and appreciation, began to relax and show her true personality. She was articulate, passionate about education, and deeply knowledgeable about subjects ranging from archaeology to linguistics to agricultural science. She answered Marcus's questions with the expertise of someone who had spent decades studying and teaching. "Maria," Marcus said at one point, "you're an incredible teacher. My children have learned more from you in 2 years than I would have thought possible." "They are exceptional students," Maria replied. "Both Jake and Emma have natural curiosity and intelligence. They ask thoughtful questions and remember what they learn. Any teacher would be lucky to work with children like these." As the afternoon progressed, Marcus began to understand the full scope of what had been happening in his home. This wasn't just casual language learning or simple cultural exchange. Maria had been providing his children with a comprehensive education that integrated history, mathematics, science, geography, and critical thinking skills. She had been treating them as capable young scholars rather than typical elementary school students, and they had risen to meet her expectations. "Why didn't you tell Mom and me about this?" Marcus asked his children. Jake and Emma looked at each other, then at Maria before Jake answered. "We weren't sure you would understand. You and Mom are always busy, and when we try to tell you about school stuff, you usually just ask if we did our homework." Emma nodded, and Maria said that sometimes parents get worried when their kids learn things that are different from what other kids are learning. Marcus felt another wave of shame. His children were right. He had been so focused on the basics, grades, homework completion, behavioral issues, that he had never thought to ask about their intellectual interests or encourage their natural curiosity about the world. "You're right," he admitted. "I haven't been the kind of father who encourages this type of learning. But I want to change that." "Really?" Emma asked hopefully. "Really," Marcus confirmed. "In fact, I have an idea. Maria, would you be willing to continue teaching Jake and Emma, but openly this time? I'd like to learn alongside them." Maria looked surprised. "You want to join our lessons?" "I want to understand what my children are passionate about," Marcus said. "And frankly, after listening to you teach this afternoon, I realize how much I could learn from you as well." Jake grinned. "Dad, you should see Maria's collection of books about ancient civilizations. She has stuff about the Aztecs and the Incas too, not just the Mayans. And she knows about current events in Latin America," Emma added. "She helps us understand how history connects to what's happening now." Marcus looked at Maria with growing respect and admiration. "Would you be interested in expanding your role here? Instead of just housekeeping and childcare, what if you became our family's cultural and language instructor?" Maria's eyes widened. "Do you mean that?" "I absolutely mean it," Marcus replied. "I think it's time our family started learning about the wider world, and I can't think of anyone better qualified to teach us." For the first time since Marcus had known her, Maria smiled a completely unguarded smile. It transformed her entire face and revealed the confident, passionate educator she truly was. "I would love that," she said simply. As they made plans for this new arrangement, Marcus realized that his early arrival home had led to much more than just discovering his children's secret lessons. It had opened the door to transforming his entire family's approach to learning, culture, and relationships. The question now was how Sarah would react to these revelations. That evening, Marcus found himself in an unusual position. For the first time in years, he was genuinely excited to share something about his day with Sarah. Usually, their dinner conversations revolved around work stress, the children's basic school progress, and household logistics. Tonight would be different. When Sarah arrived home at 6:30, she found an unexpected scene in the kitchen. Marcus was helping to prepare dinner while Jake and Emma set the table, chattering excitedly in what sounded like Spanish. Maria was still there, which was unusual since she typically left by 4 o'clock. "What's going on here?" Sarah asked, looking puzzled as she set down her purse and laptop bag. "We have some amazing things to share with you," Marcus said, unable to keep the excitement out of his voice. "But first, let's eat dinner together, all of us." Sarah looked even more confused when Marcus gestured toward Maria. "Maria, you're staying for dinner?" Maria looked uncertain again, glancing between Marcus and Sarah. The confidence she had shown during the afternoon seemed to waver in the face of Sarah's surprise. "I invited her to stay," Marcus explained. "We have a lot to discuss as a family, and Maria is very much a part of what we need to talk about." During dinner, Marcus watched Sarah's expressions change from confusion to amazement to concern, and back to amazement as Jake and Emma began sharing their knowledge. At first, Sarah seemed skeptical when the children started speaking Spanish. "Since when do you two know Spanish?" she asked. Since Maria started teaching us 2 years ago, Emma replied matter-of-factly. 2 years? Sarah's voice rose in pitch. How is that possible? Maria barely speaks English. Marcus and Maria exchanged a look, and Marcus nodded encouragingly. Maria took a deep breath and began to speak in clear, articulate English. Mrs. Richardson, I need to be honest with you. I am a former teacher with a master's degree in education from Guatemala. I have been providing Jake and Emma with comprehensive cultural and linguistic education while maintaining my duties as your housekeeper. Sarah's fork clattered to her plate. She stared at Maria with wide eyes, then looked at Marcus. You knew about this? I discovered it today when I came home early, Marcus explained. Sarah, you need to see what our children have learned. It's incredible. What followed was a repeat of the afternoon's revelations, but this time Sarah was the audience. Jake and Emma eagerly demonstrated their Spanish fluency, explained complex historical concepts, and shared their knowledge of mathematics, geography, and cultural traditions. They brought out the hidden educational materials and showed Sarah the extensive collection of books and artifacts that had been secretly stored in their own home. Sarah listened with growing amazement, but Marcus could also see concern building in her expression. Unlike his immediate pride and excitement, Sarah seemed to be processing the implications more carefully. This is incredible, Sarah said slowly. But I'm having trouble understanding why this was all kept secret from us. Maria, why didn't you tell us about your background? And kids, why didn't you share this amazing learning with us? Emma looked down at her plate. We didn't think you would understand. What do you mean? Sarah asked gently. Jake took over the explanation. You and Dad are always asking about our grades and whether we finished our homework. When we try to tell you about interesting things we've learned, you usually say, "That's nice, honey," and then ask about something else. Sarah looked stricken. Do we really do that? Not on purpose, Emma said quickly, but yeah, kind of. You seem more interested in whether we're doing what we're supposed to do than in what we actually want to learn about. Marcus watched Sarah process this feedback. He could see her running through memories of recent conversations with the children, probably recognizing the truth in their words. And Maria, Sarah continued, turning to face their housekeeper directly, why did you feel you couldn't be honest with us about your qualifications? Maria chose her words carefully. In my experience, many families prefer their domestic help to be uncomplicated. When I present my full credentials in education, some employers become uncomfortable. They worry that I might expect more respect, better pay, or that I might challenge their authority over their own children's education. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Have we made you feel like you couldn't be yourself in our home? You have never been unkind, Maria replied diplomatically. But you also never asked about my background, my interests, or my capabilities beyond housework and basic childcare. Marcus watched his wife absorb this information. Sarah had always considered herself to be progressive and open-minded, and he could see her struggling with the realization that she had unconsciously participated in limiting Maria's role in their household. I'm ashamed, Sarah said finally. We've had an incredibly talented educator in our home for 2 years, and we treated you like a housekeeper, Maria finished gently. Which is what you hired me to be. You weren't wrong to expect me to do that job well. But we were wrong not to see you as a whole person, Sarah replied. And we were wrong not to notice that our children were becoming different people right in front of us. Jake reached across the table and took his mother's hand. It's okay, Mom, we know you love us. And now you know about all the cool stuff we've been learning. Show me more, Sarah said, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. I want to understand everything. The rest of the evening transformed into an impromptu family education session. Maria brought out additional materials that even Marcus hadn't seen during the afternoon. There were photographs from her travels through Central America, examples of traditional crafts and artwork, and recordings of music from different regions. Sarah, whose background in graphic design gave her an appreciation for visual arts, was particularly fascinated by the traditional textile patterns that Maria explained. Each design told a story and represented specific cultural meanings that had been passed down through generations. This is extraordinary, Sarah said, examining a small woven wall hanging. The complexity of the mathematical patterns in these designs is incredible. It's like each piece is a work of art, a historical document, and a math lesson all at the same time. Exactly, Maria said, her enthusiasm growing as she saw Sarah's genuine interest. Indigenous artists were creating sophisticated geometric patterns centuries before European mathematicians developed formal theories about them. As the evening progressed, Marcus observed something beautiful happening in his family. For the first time in months, maybe years, they were all engaged in the same conversation. There were no phones, no television, no distractions. Jake and Emma were excited to share their knowledge with their mother. Sarah was asking thoughtful questions, and Maria was revealing herself as the passionate educator she had always been. "Maria," Sarah said eventually, "I have a proposal for you." Everyone turned to look at her expectantly. "Marcus told me about his idea to have you become our family's cultural instructor, but I'd like to expand on that. What if we helped you get your teaching credentials recognized here? I have contacts in the education department from my volunteer work, and Marcus has legal expertise. We could research what steps you need to take to become a certified teacher in this state." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that for me?" "We would do that with you," Sarah corrected. "If you're interested in returning to formal teaching, we'd like to help make that possible. And in the meantime, we'd love for you to continue educating our children and us in this incredible way." "But what about the housework?" Maria asked practically. "We'll figure it out," Marcus said. "Maybe we hire someone else for cleaning, or maybe we all pitch in more as a family. The priority should be education and learning, not having a perfectly spotless house." Emma clapped her hands together. "Does this mean we don't have to hide our Spanish books anymore?" "It means," Sarah said, pulling her daughter into a hug, "that we're going to celebrate your learning instead of being clueless about it." Jake grinned at his father. "Dad, wait until you see the project we're working on about ancient irrigation systems. Maria says we can build a working model in the backyard." "A working model?" Marcus asked. "We want to demonstrate how the Mayans used water management to support agriculture in challenging environments," Jake explained. "Maria thinks it might help us understand modern environmental challenges too." Sarah and Marcus looked at each other with amazement. Their children weren't just learning facts and vocabulary. They were developing critical thinking skills and making connections between historical knowledge and contemporary issues. "It sounds like we have a lot of catching up to do," Sarah said, "and a lot of assumptions to reconsider." As they cleared the dinner table together that night, Marcus reflected on how much had changed in a single day. This morning he had thought he knew his family's daily routine, his children's capabilities, and his housekeeper's role in their lives. Tonight, he was discovering that he had been living with strangers who were far more interesting and complex than he had ever imagined. The question now was how to build on this revelation and create a family culture that supported everyone's growth and authentic self-expression. Over the following weeks, the Richardson household underwent a remarkable transformation. What had started as a secret education program became the foundation for a completely new family dynamic. Marcus and Sarah found themselves learning alongside their children, discovering not only new languages and cultures, but also new aspects of their own capacity for growth and change. Maria's role in the family evolved from housekeeper to resident educator and cultural ambassador. True to their word, Marcus and Sarah began researching the process for getting Maria's teaching credentials recognized in their state. It was more complex than they had initially expected, involving additional coursework, examinations, and bureaucratic procedures, but Maria was determined to pursue it with their support. "The irony," Maria explained to Marcus one evening as they reviewed the requirements, "is that I need to take classes in educational methodology and child development, subjects I already mastered years ago and have been practicing with your children all along. The system doesn't always make sense," Marcus admitted. "But the good news is that we found a program specifically designed for internationally trained teachers. They'll give you credit for your experience and your degree from Guatemala." Meanwhile, the family's learning adventures expanded beyond the living room. Sarah used her design skills to help create visual aids and learning materials. She discovered that she had a talent for making complex historical timelines and geographical maps that made information more accessible and engaging. Marcus found himself genuinely excited about subjects he had never considered before. His legal background gave him a unique perspective on the historical development of different governmental systems, and he began contributing to lessons about how ancient civilizations developed laws and social structures. "Dad," Jake said during one of their evening sessions, "did you know that the Mayan legal system had environmental protection laws? They had rules about sustainable farming and forest management. that are more advanced than some modern policies. Marcus was impressed, not only by the information but by Jake's ability to make connections between historical and contemporary issues. That's fascinating. Where do you think those ideas came from? Maria says that when people live closely with the land for many generations, they learn to think about long-term consequences. Emma chimed in. They couldn't just use up all the resources and move somewhere else like some modern societies do. These kinds of sophisticated discussions became commonplace in the Richardson home. Dinner conversations evolved from basic check-ins about homework and daily activities to engaging debates about cultural differences, historical patterns, and contemporary challenges. The children's confidence grew dramatically when they realized their parents were genuinely interested in their ideas and discoveries. Jake began keeping a journal where he recorded questions that occurred to him during the day, which he would bring to their evening sessions for discussion. Emma started drawing maps and diagrams to help her understand geographical and historical concepts. "I think I want to be an archaeologist when I grow up," Emma announced one evening. "Maria showed us pictures from some dig sites in Guatemala, and I want to help discover things about ancient civilizations." "That's a wonderful goal," Sarah encouraged. "What do you think you need to study to prepare for that career?" "Well, I need to keep learning Spanish because a lot of archaeological sites are in Spanish-speaking countries," Emma explained thoughtfully. "And I need to study history and anthropology and geology. Oh, and art history too, because you have to understand what artifacts meant to the people who made them." Marcus marveled at his 8-year-old daughter's career planning sophistication. 6 months ago, Emma's future aspirations had focused on becoming a princess or a veterinarian. Now she was thinking systematically about the academic preparation required for her goals. Jake's interests developed in a different direction. He became fascinated by the mathematical and engineering achievements of ancient civilizations and wanted to understand how historical innovations could be applied to modern problems. "Maria taught us about Incan rope bridges," he explained to a neighbor who had stopped by. They built suspension bridges using only natural materials that lasted for hundreds of years. Modern engineers study them to learn about sustainable construction techniques. The transformation wasn't limited to academic learning. The family's social dynamics also changed as they developed new ways of communicating and spending time together. They established Spanish Sundays where the entire family tried to speak only Spanish for the whole day. Marcus and Sarah struggled much more than their children, but everyone laughed together at their mistakes and celebrated small improvements. They also started a family tradition of culture nights, where they would explore the music, food, art, and traditions of different countries. Maria would share her knowledge and experiences, while Marcus and Sarah researched and contributed information from their own perspectives. During one memorable culture night focused on Peru, Sarah used her graphic design skills to create a presentation about traditional Peruvian textiles. Marcus researched the legal and political structure of the Incan Empire. Jake built a model of Machu Picchu using mathematical principles he had learned. And Emma prepared a traditional Peruvian dish with Maria's guidance. "This is the most fun our family has ever had together," Emma declared as they sat down to eat their homemade Peruvian feast. Marcus realized she was right. Despite all the material advantages he had worked to provide for his family, the nice house, the good neighborhood, the financial security, he had never created experiences that brought them together in meaningful, joyful ways like this. The changes weren't just internal to the Richardson family. Word began to spread through their neighborhood about the remarkable transformation taking place in their home. Other parents started asking Sarah and Marcus about their children's language learning and cultural education. "How did Jake become so interested in environmental science?" asked Mrs. Chen, whose son was in Jake's class. "Tommy says Jake knows more about sustainable agriculture than their science teacher. We discovered that our housekeeper is actually a brilliant educator," Sarah explained. "She's been teaching our children to see connections between historical knowledge and contemporary issues." Some neighbors were skeptical. Mrs. Peterson, who lived next door, made comments about the children getting above themselves with all their fancy learning. But others were intrigued and asked if Maria might be willing to offer lessons to their children as well. Maria was hesitant about expanding her teaching beyond the Richardson family. "I don't have official credentials yet," she pointed out, "and I'm not sure other families would be as accepting as yours has become." "But you could start informally," Sarah suggested. Maybe a weekly cultural club for neighborhood children? You could share stories and traditions and basic Spanish vocabulary. Marcus supported the idea. Think of it as practice for when you do get your official teaching certification, and it would help you build a reputation in the community as an educator, rather than just as domestic help. Eventually, Maria agreed to try a small program. They started with Saturday morning sessions in the Richardsons' backyard, initially just for 3 neighborhood children whose parents had expressed genuine interest. Word spread quickly, and within a month, Maria had a waiting list of families who wanted their children to participate in what became known as the Richardson Cultural Club. The success of these community programs helped boost Maria's confidence. As she prepared for her teaching certification exams, she was rediscovering her identity as an educator and beginning to envision a future where she could use her skills and knowledge in a formal academic setting. Sometimes I can't believe how much my life has changed, Maria confided to Sarah one afternoon as they watched a group of children working on a collaborative map of South America. 6 months ago, I felt invisible in this community. Now I feel like I have something valuable to contribute. You always had something valuable to contribute, Sarah replied. We just weren't smart enough to recognize it. As Marcus watched his transformed family and community, he realized that his early arrival home that October afternoon had initiated changes that went far beyond what he could have imagined. They had all learned that assumptions about people's capabilities and worth could blind them to incredible opportunities for growth and connection. The question now was how to sustain and build on these positive changes as they moved forward into an uncertain but exciting future. Tomorrow, Maria would return to her work as a district education coordinator, continuing to help other teachers and families discover what the Richardsons had learned. That the most profound education happens when we approach each other with curiosity, respect, and an openness to being surprised by the depths of human knowledge and creativity that exist all around us. As Marcus locked the front door, he smiled at the memory of who he had been just months ago. A man so focused on his routines and assumptions that he had nearly missed the extraordinary learning happening in his own home. Now he looked forward to whatever surprises tomorrow might bring, confident that his family had developed the curiosity and wisdom to recognize opportunities for growth. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the auditorium of Lincoln Elementary School, watching his daughter Emma present her science fair project to a panel of judges. Her display board showed detailed diagrams of ancient Mayan agricultural techniques, alongside modern sustainable farming methods. She was explaining how historical water management systems could be adapted to address contemporary drought problems. In the Ain, Mayans understood that agriculture had to work with natural cycles rather than against them, Emma explained confidently to the judges. They created raised field systems that captured rainwater during wet seasons and slowly released it during dry periods. Modern farmers in Central America are rediscovering these techniques to deal with climate change. One of the judges, a local college professor, looked impressed. Emma, where did you learn about Mayan agricultural systems? That's pretty advanced material for a 4th grader. My teacher Maria taught me, Emma replied proudly. She's from Guatemala, and she knows a lot about indigenous farming methods. She helped me understand how historical knowledge can help solve modern problems. Marcus felt a surge of pride, not just in Emma's presentation, but in the journey that had brought them to this moment. The shy, academically struggling child from a year ago had transformed into a confident, young scholar who could discuss complex topics with adults and make sophisticated connections between different fields of knowledge. Across the gymnasium, he could see Jake presenting his own project about renewable energy systems used by ancient civilizations. Jake had built working models of water wheels, solar collectors, and wind-powered devices that demonstrated how historical innovations had inspired modern green technology. Sarah stood beside Marcus, beaming with pride as she recorded Emma's presentation on her phone. Remember when we used to worry about whether they were keeping up with their grade-level expectations? She whispered. Now I worry about whether their schools are keeping up with them, Marcus replied with a smile. The transformation in their children had been remarkable, but it was only part of a larger story. Maria had successfully completed her teaching certification program and had been hired as a bilingual education coordinator for the school district. Her role involved developing cultural competency programs and supporting other internationally trained teachers in getting their credentials recognized. The irony, Maria had told them when she received the job offer, is that I'm now officially qualified to do what I've been doing informally for years. The Richardson family's relationship with Maria had evolved far beyond employer and employee. She had become a true family friend and mentor who continued to challenge all of them to grow intellectually and culturally. Even though she no longer worked as their housekeeper, she still came by regularly for their family culture nights and helped coordinate the neighborhood learning programs that had grown out of their initial Saturday morning sessions. The community impact had been significant. What started as informal lessons in the Richardsons' backyard had grown into a recognized community program called Cultural Bridges that served over 40 children from diverse backgrounds. The program brought together families from different ethnic and socioeconomic communities, creating connections that might never have formed otherwise. It's amazing how learning about other cultures helps children appreciate their own heritage too, noted Dr. Williams, the elementary school principal, during a recent school board meeting. We've seen improvements not just in language skills but in empathy, critical thinking, and global awareness. Marcus had also experienced personal growth through this journey. His legal practice had begun to include more pro bono work helping immigrants navigate credential recognition and employment issues. He had discovered that his skills could be used to address the systemic barriers that prevented talented people like Maria from contributing their full capabilities to their communities. You know, he had told Sarah recently, I used to think success meant climbing the corporate ladder and maximizing billable hours. Now I think it means using your privileges and skills to help other people reach their potential. Sarah's evolution had been equally significant. Her design business had expanded to include educational materials and cultural programming. She had partnered with Maria to create visual resources for bilingual education programs and had discovered a passion for making complex information accessible to diverse learners. The family's learning adventures had also become more ambitious. They had taken their first international trip together, visiting Guatemala so that Marcus and Sarah could see firsthand the places and cultures that Maria had been teaching them about. The children had been able to practice their Spanish in authentic settings and had gained a deeper appreciation for the challenges faced by people who emigrate to new countries. When we were in Guatemala, I realized that Maria was brave in ways I had never understood, Emma had written in her travel journal. She left behind her family, her language, and her career to give her children better opportunities. That takes more courage than I think I could ever have. The trip had also reinforced the family's commitment to global awareness and cultural humility. They had stayed with some of Maria's relatives and had experienced what it meant to be outsiders trying to navigate a different culture and language. It was good for us to be the ones who didn't understand everything, Jake had observed. It made me think about how hard it must be for people who come to our country and have to learn everything new. Now, as Marcus watched his children confidently presenting their research to academic judges, he reflected on how much their family's definition of education had changed. They had moved from seeing learning as something that happened in school and was measured by grades to understanding it as a lifelong process of curiosity, critical thinking, and cultural engagement. The judges finished reviewing Emma's project and moved on to the next display. Emma ran over to her parents with excitement. "Did you hear what Professor Martinez said?" she asked breathlessly. "She said my project showed graduate-level thinking about interdisciplinary problem-solving. What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said, giving his daughter a hug, "that you're learning to think like a scholar who can connect ideas from different fields to understand complex problems." "Just like Maria taught us to do," Emma replied matter-of-factly. As they walked through the science fair, looking at other students' projects, Marcus noticed something interesting. Many of the most impressive displays came from children who had participated in Maria's Cultural Bridges program. These students were incorporating global perspectives, historical context, and interdisciplinary thinking into their work in ways that set them apart from traditional grade-level projects. "Maria's influence is spreading," Sarah observed, noticing the same pattern. "These children are learning to think differently about learning itself." Later that evening, the Richardson family gathered for their weekly culture night, which had now expanded to include several neighborhood families. Tonight's focus was on scientific innovations from different cultures throughout history. Maria had prepared presentations about Islamic contributions to mathematics, Chinese developments in medicine, and African innovations in metallurgy. One of the most important things you can learn, Maria told the group of children and adults, is that every culture has contributed to human knowledge. Innovation and intelligence exist everywhere, not just in the places or time periods that get the most attention in traditional textbooks. Marcus looked around the room at the diverse group of families who had become their extended community through this shared commitment to learning. There were the Chens, whose son Tommy had become fascinated with environmental science after learning about traditional Chinese agricultural methods. The Johnson family had discovered that their daughter Mia had a gift for languages and was now studying French and Arabic in addition to Spanish. The Martinez family, recent immigrants from El Salvador, had found a welcoming community where their cultural knowledge was valued rather than seen as a barrier to integration. "You know," Marcus said to Sarah as they cleaned up after the evening session, "I used to think that our biggest responsibility as parents was to provide our children with advantages, good schools, safe neighborhoods, enriching activities. Now I realize that our biggest responsibility is to help them become the kind of people who create advantages for others. And to recognize that we never stop being students ourselves," Sarah added. "Some of my most important learning this year has come from 8-year-olds and a woman I initially underestimated." As they turned off the lights in their living room, which had been transformed from a simple family space into a classroom, laboratory, and cultural center, Marcus reflected on the unexpected journey that had started with his early arrival home from work. A moment of curiosity about an unanswered phone call had led to discoveries that changed not just his family, but their entire community's approach to education, diversity, and human potential. The lesson, he realized, wasn't just about the importance of cultural education or language learning, though those were valuable. The deeper lesson was about the transformative power of seeing people fully, challenging assumptions and creating environments where everyone's capabilities could flourish. Tomorrow, Maria would return to her work as a district education coordinator, continuing to help other teachers and families discover what the Richardsons had learned. That the most profound education happens when we approach each other with curiosity, respect, and an openness to being surprised by the depths of human knowledge and creativity that exist all around us. As Marcus locked the front door, he smiled at the memory of who he had been just months ago. A man so focused on his routines and assumptions that he had nearly missed the extraordinary learning happening in his own home. Now he looked forward to whatever surprises tomorrow might bring, confident that his family had developed the curiosity and wisdom to recognize opportunities for growth wherever they might appear.